Hello guys and welcome to a new Wargame video today by me, Vulcan. Today we're looking at the PACT support units, and before I start I want to just say a massive thanks to the 6,000 subscribers that I now have. It's just come up recently, and honestly I'm amazed that I've got this far, and I really want to just quickly thank all of you guys and everyone who's subscribed since for subscribing to my videos. It's just, I think it's awesome to have that many people. I can't imagine having that many people in one room. That would just be insane. So yeah, thanks to all you guys, but I'm sure you came here not to listen to me thanking you, but to get on with the PACT support units. So let's get on with it. To begin with, we have the 2S1 Caliphate, and this particular artillery unit is very average. We've got an accuracy of 4 and a HE power of 8. A range versus ground of 15,050 meters. Then we got the suppression value of 281 and a rate of fire of 7 rounds per minute. Now, this particular artillery unit is exactly the same as the Gvozdnika and the Gvozdzik. Now, sorry about the pronunciation, but it can get pretty difficult sometimes, but all three of these are exactly the same. You've got one for the Czech Republic, one for the Russians, and one for the Polish. They are decent if you keep them at a very close range in terms of just behind your front lines. You don't want to be firing them at max range at the 15,000 meters, because the accuracy of 4 makes the spread of the shots really, really big. Whereas if you keep them within, say, 7,000 meters, the same range as like a long-range mortar, then you're going to be doing a lot more damage, because the accuracy is going to be a lot more concentrated, and the HE power of 8 isn't too shabby. It's not the best. Most high-tier artillery pieces that cost a bit more are normally 10 HE power, and mortars, or howitzers, sorry, they go up to 14 HE power. Now, not a unit I would necessarily recommend, but useful if you need either smoke support on your deck with a little bit of oomph behind it. Because often people go for like an odd mortar unit just so they can bring in some smoke if they need it. But then you've got this crappy mortar unit that can't necessarily deal a great damage against certain units. Now, a HE power of 8 is actually the same as like a high tier mortar. For example, if we just quickly switch over to the Nona, you can see this one has a HE power of 8 as well, and it's a mortar with a higher accuracy and a lower range, which an accuracy of 6 for a mortar with a lower range is actually really good. So it's a bit of a trade-off here. You're going for a normal artillery unit, but you've got to keep it at the similar ranges to mortars. So sometimes I would just suggest getting a mortar instead. The only other thing that's quite nice about the Caliphate is the main gun. You've got a chance to defend yourself, whereas mortar units normally don't, and therefore, you know, you're going to be struggling to keep them alive if you get caught out. Whereas these things, they have a main gun to defend themselves. So moving on to the Dana. This is a very popular artillery unit, or at least it was in Wargame European Escalation, and the reason for that is it has a range versus ground of 18,200 meters, accuracy of 5, HE power of 10, suppression of 350, and a rate of fire of 6 rounds per minute. Now, an accuracy of 5 isn't great. Again, you have to keep it within those shorter ranges, but the thing that's really nice about the Dana is its speed, 80 kilometers per hour. Now, this is incredibly good for, 1, avoiding counter artillery, and 2, for getting into position very, very quickly for shorter range artillery barrages. And with the accuracy of 5 at very short range, this can be extremely effective. HE power of 10 matches some of the higher tier artillery units. Then the suppression of 350 is going to be suppressing both heavy tanks, medium tanks, and, well, basically anything else. We've got a main gun on it, which is useful in some respects to defend itself against enemy armor. It only has a front armor of 2 and a top armor, rear armor, and side armor of 1. But to be honest, if you're lucky, the AP power of 7 will be enough to keep it alive in a close combat skirmish. But you don't want to get it into that situation normally, and that's why it has the speed to get itself away. Now, most wheeled vehicles have a road speed of 150 kilometers per hour, and therefore this is what the Dana has because it has 8 wheels. And then we've got the DSHK machine gun, which you can use to help it defend itself a little against infantry, although I would never recommend keeping it around if there's any infantry nearby. So it's a very good mobile artillery unit, useful for skirmishing with the enemy at long ranges. Then we've got the Pavlonka. Again, this is very similar to the Peon that you can get for the Russians. I believe the Peon is the original version, and then you've got the Pavlonka, which is the Czech version. Then we've got an accuracy of 9 and a HE power of 14 and a suppression of 467. Now, this is very, very similar to the howitzers on the NATO side, the M110s. The only difference here is that if you look at the PACT versions, you've got the Russian Peon, which matches the Pavlonka, and then you've got the Malka, which is a slight upgrade, 20 points more expensive, but you get an extra accuracy of 1 and a longer range, but you get a rate of fire of 2, which means it can fire 2 rounds in a salvo rather than 1, which is very, very effective. And these things are very, very good at pinpoint accurate shots. That's what howitzers are good for. Now, their range of 36,750 meters is not great, purely because if you're going to be using a howitzer shot, you want it to be go exactly where you want it to. If you fire at max range, then normally the reticule will be so big that you'll never hit directly where you want to go. So make sure you keep them within, say, 20,000 meters. I know it's still a really long way, but it's going to be a lot more accurate. And the accuracy of 9, you'd be surprised how small a corrected shot is. And considering you're only going to be firing 1 shell, you want it to go exactly where you want it to. So with the HE power 14, you can literally one-shot like important AA units on the enemy side and things like that. It's very, very useful for picking off enemy support units and enemy artillery, actually, in fact, because of its extremely long range. Then we've got the RZP 2K12 Cub M. Now, this is the first of the huge radar AA for the PACT side. We've got a range versus helicopters of 2,450 meters, a range versus airplanes of 3,850 meters, accuracy of 7, a HE power of 7, suppression of 280, and a rate of fire of 5 rounds per minute. This is all for a cost of 45. Now, it's actually ridiculous how overpowered PACT AA can be without the use of seed missiles from the NATO side. And that's the reason that a lot of people use and field these kinds of AA a lot. Because I think only the Americans actually have seed missiles. And if you use any other nation on the NATO side, you're going to be struggling to deal with these kind of units without enemy incursions with your own special forces or managing to snipe them with HGMs and such. So these can be a right pain in the ass to take care of, and that's why you should use them as PACT. Now, they have the exceptional optics versus air units. Exceptional optics doesn't mean they're good at recon, don't forget. And the strength that they have is 10, of course, matches most of the other support units. But the thing you have to worry about with the Cub is its autonomy. You can't move it around a great deal. It's 250 kilometers, and that means you're going to have to keep it resupplied. Now, I don't want to go too much into keeping things resupplied all the time, because I did it quite a lot in the NATO support tutorial, but it's not a big deal with AA and artillery, purely because most of the time you have support or supply with them anyway, and therefore it's going to be refueling them as you go along. Now supply isn't used up much by fuel, so you can keep them rolling for a very, very long distance as long as you've got those supply units with them. Then you've got the ZSU 23 4v1 Shilka. Now the Shilka is a really awesome radar AA unit, has a quad autocannon with 2,275 meters versus helicopters and airplanes, accuracy of 7, HE power of 1, suppression of 53, and a rate of fire of 909 rounds per minute. It's extremely fast. Range versus ground as well of 1,050 meters, which means it can suppress ground forces very, very well. Now all autocannons have a HE power of 1, so it's not going to be doing a great deal of damage versus armor, but it can help kill and suppress lightly armored vehicles. Now it's got exceptional optics versus those air units. Any unit that has radar normally has exceptional optics versus air. And we've got size medium, speed of 50 kilometers per hour isn't great, but a road speed of 110 kilometers per hour helps it get to where it needs to be. Then we got autonomy of 400 kilometers. Now these don't have to be babysit with supply units. They can normally just defend areas on their own. If you spread them around enough in forests, you can really catch out helicopters, and they're really cheap, 25 points. So bear that in mind. You might want to try that sometime. Then we've got the Beruza. This is basically a small upgrade from the Shilka. We've got an extra range on the against helicopters and airplanes of 2,450 meters, and we get an extra accuracy of +2 at an accuracy of 9. Now I'm not sure if this is really worth the 10-point upgrade, purely because if you keep them cheap, then the enemy is not going to be so concerned about taking them out. So generally you can get away with having them in like all over the place, whereas if they cost 10 points more, then you're going to be restricting the amount of them you can spread around, and you're going to be crying a lot more if you lose them. Then we've got the 2K22 Tunguska. This is an iconic PACT AA unit. It has a quad autocannon which uses radar against helicopters and airplanes, and it has a range of 2,625 meters, accuracy of 11, HE power 1. Very, very accurate when planes come into close enough range. We've also got a range versus ground of 1,050 meters, like most autocannons on AA units. But this is probably its weakest point. Now, with all these kinds of things, like the Shilkas and the Cubs and so on, PACT has a lot of radar AA. And it means that if you are playing against Americans with seed rockets, they're going to take out a lot of your AA very easily. Something you've got to definitely think about. And a trick you can do with the Tunguska is you can turn off its autocannon. You're probably thinking, why would you do that? Well, if you turn off the autocannons on the Tunguskas, then the enemy seed missiles can't target your vehicle. So your Tunguska can still fire its Sackloss missiles because they're not radar, but it can't be targeted because the radar is technically turned off. And if you are fired upon by a seed missile and it's mid-flight, and then you turn off the radar, it does still miss. So bear that in mind. It's a very, very good tip. We've also got a speed of 60 kilometers per hour on this particular vehicle. It's decent for getting itself around, and fuel capacity and autonomy is going to take care of itself. We've got optics of exceptional, obviously because it's got the radar against helicopters and airplanes. And if we upgrade slightly, the upgrade is basically on the missiles. So you're paying 10 points for an extra 700 range on versus helicopters, and an extra 525 meter range versus airplanes. Then we get an extra 3 accuracy on the missile, and an extra 1 HE power, and extra 40 suppression. Now the thing you have to think about with the 2K22M Tunguska is that it's a prototype unit for the Russians. So don't count on getting this on your all nations decks for the PACT side, because you're not going to be able to find it. But the normal Tunguska you still can. Now unfortunately the HE power is lacking on the Tunguska, but because the NATO helicopters aren't actually that strong, I think they only go up to about 8 health for the attack choppers. So 4 HE power is really all you need. So this Tunguska is still very, very effective, and with an accuracy of 10, which is at 50% hit chance, it's gonna do well. Now I believe they fire in shots of 2, like salvos of 2, so they fire off 2 missiles, they wait, they fire off 2 more missiles. So every one of those 2 missiles is gonna hit, and versus like an Apache, it's gonna be very, very effective. Now we've got the Gvozdika. This is exactly the same as the Karafiet, so I'm not going to talk about that in too much detail. Then we have the 2S3 Acadia. Now this is another very mediocre artillery unit. You're actually losing an accuracy from the Gvozdika. You can see that the Gvozdika has 4 accuracy, and the Acadia has an accuracy of 3, but you're getting the HE power that is so greatly missed in the Gvozdika. You got HE power of 10, suppression of 350 because the millimeter of the cannon is increased by 30, and we got a rate of fire of 3 rounds per minute, which isn't a lot at all. Now this is not a unit I would recommend bringing in. It's when you upgrade to either the Acadia 2S3M or the 2S19 Musta S. These are the ones that I would recommend you get. Now the 2S3M Acadia, now this is worth it because it's cheap for a HE power of 10. 65 points for a HE power of 10 is actually reasonably good. You got the same accuracy as the Gvozdika, and it's going to be doing a decent amount of damage if you keep it just behind your front lines at a reasonably close range, because the accuracy of 4 is easily countered by just taking your artillery closer. Now accuracy on artillery units is very different than it is in anything else, because it affects the circle, or like the radius of the corrected shot and the uncorrected shot of artillery units. And if you get artillery units closer, that circle gets smaller. So that's why I keep suggesting to bring them closer, because as long as you can keep them well defended, you're just making them more accurate for free. And another good thing about this particular Acadia is it does have a decent amount of armor to deal with counter artillery, and also the speed of 50 km per hour isn't too shabby. Like, it can move around a reasonable amount, and the fuel capacity and autonomy will look after itself. So these are good because you're not going to have to supply them too much, because they have 45 rounds on their main cannon, and they're going to be able to move around on their own. Obviously, if they run out of ammunition, you're always going to have to resupply them anyway. With the 2S19 Musta S though, we have an increased accuracy again, increased rate of fire. This has a very nice rate of fire, can fire huge salvos, and we've got an increased range up to 23,800 meters. Now again, you don't want to be using this at max range, because you're going to just be killing yourself with how large the spread will be of the artillery. But one thing that's really good about the Musta S compared to the Dana is that the Musta S has 5 front armor, 3 side armor, 2 rear and 2 top armor. Now the Dana has 2 front armor, 1 top armor, 1 rear armor, 1 side armor. And the reason I'm comparing these is because these are the 2 units that people compare the most when it comes to high tier packed artillery. And people often go for the Dana because it has the extra speed. Now you can see that the accuracy and HE power is exactly the same on both. It's just the other things that you're compensating for. So, for example, the Musta has much better armor and a bit better range. The Dana has less armor but more speed and less range. So, in my opinion, I think the Musta is better because it still is reasonably fast at 60 kilometers per hour, which is not bad for an artillery unit, and it's got the 5 front armor, which if you're a bit slow like me to move around your artillery and you kind of forget about it occasionally, that 5 armor comes in very handy when you've suddenly realized that your artillery is being counterfired, and it can keep them alive a lot longer than the Danas. So it's definitely something to think about. Now the road speed is still reasonable, even though because its tracked unit is 110 kilometers per hour. Now the other thing that's really nice about the Musta compared to the Dana is you get a much better main gun. So the caliber is the same at 152 millimeters, but the HEAT rounds that you get, we've got accuracy of 3 and an AP power of 16, which makes it a lot more effective against heavily armored targets. Now obviously you don't really want to get this called out by armored targets, but if you do, then this is going to be a lot better at taking care of them than the Dana. Now the Dana actually has a better accuracy, but less than half the AP power. Now, accuracy of 3 is 15% hit chance. Depending on how close they are, it's going to increase. But, you know, it's not going to be a great deal of chance of hitting them. So don't rely on the cannon at all. And I would never use it as a tank because you don't want to be wasting 110 points just like that. And I believe you get a lot more availability with the Dana than you do the MSTA in a armory in the deck. Sorry, you're going to be getting 2 Danas for every 1 Musta. Now obviously it also has the NSVT machine gun to help it protect itself a little bit versus infantry, but never let infantry get that close to your artillery. Now we've got a few units which I've basically already covered. We've got the Gvozdik, which is exactly the same as the Gvozdika, and the Karafiet. Then we've got the Dana, which is exactly the same as the Czech version. And then we've got the Pionia, which is the same as the Peon that we've already talked about. Then we've got the MTLB 82mm. This is a reasonably good mortar, very cheap, 25 points. We've got an accuracy of 3 and a HE power of 7. Now you've got to compare this to the likes of the Gvozdik. And the reason for this is because if you look, the Gvozdik has an accuracy of 4 and a HE power of 8. Costs 45 points. You've got the MTLB, has an accuracy of 3 and a HE power of 4, so you're losing 1 in both stats, but for a cost of 25 points. You've also got more rate of fire and more rounds that are carried around with the vehicle itself. Now, don't worry too much about the machine gun. You're not going to be using it if you're keeping it in the right place. And the fuel capacity and autonomy of this vehicle is going to be able to move around itself without needing any resupply. And because it has such a high ammo capacity, it's going to not run out of shells too quickly, depending on how often you use it. Then we've got the speed of 60 km per hour, a reasonably fast vehicle off-road, and a road speed of 110 km per hour. Now you can upgrade to the MTLB Vasilek, but I've never known why you would do this. Because the caliber is exactly the same size, but you're losing rate of fire and you're losing ammo capacity for more points, which makes absolutely 0 sense to me. Now, if anyone could clarify why I would take the M37 over the Vasilek, please, by all means, let me know. But in terms of stats, you're paying more for worse stats. And that is exactly not the thing you want to be doing in Wargame. Then we can move on to the 2S9 Nona, or Nona, I'm not exactly sure how that's pronounced. This is an extremely good artillery unit, and it can be used on an all-nations deck for the PACT. Has a range versus ground of 7,700 meters, accuracy of 6 and a HE power of 8. We got a suppression value of 276, which is quite high for a mortar, and a rate of fire of 7 rounds per minute. It also can use its main gun to attack armoured targets with an AP power of 14 and an accuracy of 4. But I would never recommend using this to attack ground targets at close range with the main gun. Now, the speed of 50 km per hour isn't great, but it's good enough to get it around the map. And we've got fuel capacity and autonomy, which is going to look after itself. Now, the really nice thing about this particular mortar is that it has an accuracy of 6, which is 3 more than most mortars. And that makes it an extremely accurate mortar unit at closer ranges. And because it's only got an accuracy or a range versus ground of 7,700 meters, it's going to be a very, very small aiming reticule over the enemy, which is very, very useful for a unit that has a HE power of 8. If you upgrade a bit more, we go to a prototype version. So this is prototype again for the Russians. But you get a super improved accuracy. You get an extra 4 accuracy for 10 more points. You also get a machine gun to help it defend itself against infantry. And you get an improved speed of 60 kilometers per hour off-road. And you get a road speed of 150 kilometers per hour because it goes from being tracked to wheeled. And basically, if you're playing a Russian-specific deck, always go for the Nona SVK over the Nona. But if you're going for the Nona or Nona with an all-nations deck, then obviously that's the only one you're going to be able to get. But I would definitely recommend it over any other mortar unit on the PACT side. Then we got the Peon. Again, I've already talked about this briefly. And the Malka, which is basically the same thing, except from improved range, improved accuracy, and rate of fire. Same purpose though, just a little bit better at it. And that's it for part 1 of my Wargame PACT support unit tutorial. Next time I'll be looking at some of the infrared, AA, and some of the rocket artillery that you can get for the PACT side. But for now, hopefully this has been useful. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.